I don't stop.
You want to check the water gas pop over here? The gas mains right here. Right down.
We checked the area with meters, and it was kind of routine and pretty simple.
It was 8:46 in the morning.
And then we heard a plane come over, and in Manhattan, you don't hear planes too often, especially loud ones.
Hello, I'm Joe Kamation, President of the POA and a proud American. First of all, I'd like to thank Alyssa DeCasperis Escar and the entire 9/11 committee for their organizing this memorial. I'm honored to be speaking here today. 20 years ago today, our way of life and our freedom came under attack. We were attacked on our own soil. Our country changed forever. Our lives changed forever. On this fateful day 20 years ago, like most Americans on the West Coast, I woke up to terrible news about the accident in New York City. It was confusing and tragic. A commercial airline flew into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Then, 18 minutes later, our country watched in horror as a second airline hit the South Tower. 40 minutes later, another plane hit the Pentagon. It was clear this was not an accident. It was an attack. Later that morning, a fourth plane was hijacked over Pennsylvania, where a few of the passengers rose and fought to divert the attack. That plane went down in an empty field, and all the passengers lost their lives. No one on the ground was hurt, thanks to the heroics of a few. That plane was thought to be targeting the White House or the Capitol building. I wonder who and why anyone would do such a thing. That day, 2,763 lives were lost at the World Trade Center. An additional 125 lives were lost at the Pentagon, and 44 lives were lost on the plane that was hijacked over Pennsylvania. Today, 20 years later, I think a lot about those 2,996 fatalities on the 9/11 attack. The families that had to endure the terrible day not knowing if their loved ones were safe, and those facing the realization that they will never hold their loved ones again. I think about the emergency workers, the firefighters, the police, and the paramedics who lost their lives trying to save the victims still trapped inside the building. All of these people are the ones we need to remember. They are the ones that gave the ultimate sacrifice. We owe them this pledge. Canyon Lake will never forget. Thank you.
Hello, Canyon Lake. My name is Casey Castillo, and I am your mayor. I'm very honored to be able to prepare this message for you on behalf of the City of Canyon Lake and the 9/11 Committee. You know, 20 years ago, our lives were dramatically changed, and this is a period where we need to make sure that we never forget. Canyon Lake is an amazing, strong, and resilient community, and our best feature is that we love our neighbors, and that neighborhood extends all the way to New York. We can never forget those who were affected by the terror attack 20 years ago, to include the victims, the families of those victims, and our brave first responders. Make sure that you put your blue lights out and decorate your house on 9/11. Make sure that you participate in the moment of silence, and make sure that we as a community never forget.
Hi, I'm Craig Spielman. I've moved to Canyon Lake about 3 years ago.
but before I came to this beautiful community, I lived in New York and New Jersey and actually worked on Wall Street. And I want to tell you a little bit about what happened on September 11th, 2001. I walked through the World Trade Center as I normally do, which was my everyday commute. And that was about 7 a.m. in the morning. And I went to my office at 75 Wall Street. I was working for JP Morgan at the time. And wanted to get in. I had a whole bunch of meetings scheduled that day. And I wanted to get in early to prepare for the meetings. Little did I know it would actually change my entire day and probably some of my life at that point. At around 8:15, 8:30, I looked out the window of my 17th floor office and I saw papers flying through the air and didn't understand what they were because it looked like they were dropped from a plane. Little did we realize that that was after the first plane hit the World Trade Center. As people from my team started coming in from work, most of them came through the World Trade Center on their commute. They said that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. We checked the news and we all thought it was a small plane like a Cessna. Little did we realize it was actually a jet. And people were pretty shaken up. So we were monitoring the situation. And as we were gathering to talk about it, the second plane hit. And the second plane, for some reason, we really heard the noise, and actually the window shook in our building. And we realized then that this was not an accident, that it was something bigger. So we started making contingency plans of what we were going to do. And then maybe 15, 20 minutes later, the North Tower collapsed, and we heard the floors just pancaking and exploding. It sounded like bombs going off, and that really shook a lot of people up. While we were waiting there, after the North Tower collapsed, you saw the entire sky was black. I mean, it looked like midnight, and there was nothing but dust and darkness throughout the whole area. We made a team decision to actually try to get to the ferry on the opposite side of Manhattan. So we wet paper towels, put them over our faces, and we ran as fast as we could to the ferry. And on the ferry, we saw people that were completely covered in dust, and people were attending to them by using water bottles to clean their eyes. And there was a very eerie silence before we took off to go to New Jersey. As we were leaving the port, we looked back and we actually saw the second tower collapse. And it was a horrific scene. And I myself, I lost 5 people there that I was friends with and worked with. One of them was named Paul Bristow, and Paul and I went to dinner out in London. I used to speak at a lot of risk conferences, and Paul was one of the main coordinators for the Waters Group. And he actually moved to New York about 6 months prior to 9/11 because he wanted to get married, and his fiance worked for the same company. And they were holding a risk conference at Windows of the World on the 105th floor that day. Now, fortunately for me, I spoke at that same exact conference at Windows of the World in June, so therefore I didn't attend the September 11th meeting or conference. And I think about that all the time, that I kind of dodged a pretty big bullet. But the people that were lost on that day that I knew were mostly ages 25 to 28 years old. They used to bother me for my presentations and always had a smile and always make sure everything was going right for me when I presented. And they had their whole lives ahead of them. After 9/11, we stayed in New Jersey. The fires burned for probably another, I'm going to say 4 to 6 months. We came back to the office after 3 weeks, and the smell in the air was horrific. You could see the fire still blazing. And, I worked at Wall Street for many years, and it was a great place to work. It was one of the most exciting places in the world to work. There's so much history. I worked right down by the stock exchange and used to go to restaurants where they planned the American Revolution. I mean, it's a fabulous place. After that, you really didn't want to stay around. and it kind of took the glow off of working down there forever. And I never looked at it the same way. But that was a horrific day, and I want to thank the 9/11 committee, and especially Alyssa DeCaprius for actually moving this along, because I wanted to share this story with other people, especially on the 20th anniversary. It's a day I certainly will never forget, and but each year it's difficult. Each year, as it gets closer and closer to the time period, I just get this strange feeling. It's a feeling of remorse, but also a feeling of happiness that I could share this story with you. So thank you very much.
How you doing, Canyon Lakers? Jeremy Smith here, Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Canyon Lake. Today is September 11th, and it's a day that we all come together and remember the men and women who sacrificed their life and the men and women who unfortunately lost their lives in the World Trade Centers. It's a terrible memory, but we came together as a country, we come together as a community, and we honor these men and women. We are so blessed to be part of Canyon Lake. In fact, last year during COVID, when we came together to honor those on September 11th, other cities took note, and they're doing the exact same thing this year, and they showed how important it is to come together and unite. So I want to say a special thank you to the families, to the loved ones, and let us never forget what took place on that day.
I was asked to introduce myself, and I'll simply say, first off, I'm an American. I was born in the Bronx, New York. I grew up in New York, but I am living and I am from Canyon Lake, California. My name is Brian Bach. A lot of people know me for a lot of different reasons. Many do know me from the 9/11 Tribute in Light last year, which I cannot thank the group that came together, and frankly the whole community that came together, and the community around us that came together to make that happen. I'm also currently and honored to serve on the Canyon Lake Properties Owners Association as a board of director and secretary. And most important, I am a resident for 10 years now of Canyon Lake, California. And more important than that even, I am a father and a husband to a wonderful woman, Judith Bach, and my children, Samuel and Nathaniel. I'm honored and privileged to be asked to present my thoughts on 9/11, the 20th commemoration, and Canyon Lake, and how we this year are doing something, again, very special for the community, but for each individual in their heart and their soul, and frankly, for our country. I'm also asked to give my thoughts or remind people what they, how it was on 9/11. I can tell you that I was in California on my way to a client, I'll never forget. And the first thing I thought was, this can't be. Anyone who is from New York, been to the World Trade Center buildings, would first think, this can't be, because a building, frankly 2 buildings, and ended up being 3 and more, being taken down by force would be unfathomable. Each footprint of the World Trade Center 1 and 2 are 1 acre square. It's huge. I'm trying to put in perspective maybe the town center here in Canyon Lake. Basically, that's the footprint of both buildings. I worked for 2 summers in 2 World Trade Center on the 96th floor. You can't imagine how many people, how busy it was, or would have been, frankly, if it was a little bit later. But either way, the colossal devastation from this is just unfathomable. I mean, we know 3,000 people and so forth, et cetera, but the concept of it, of the buildings coming down, is just unfathomable. The other concept that's unfathomable is today's world, where I've heard from people, and we've seen it on the news, where people have discounted what happened in 9/11, questioned about how and why and what happened. And some people, frankly, think it wasn't that big of a deal. There are also children and young adults who have no idea what happened, including my older son, who is 18 years old. He knows about it. He knows about it through me and my wife and our family and our friends. But there are many people like him and his contemporaries that have very little idea of what happened. So to put it in perspective, America was attacked. I'm not old enough to remember actual wars that we were in, World War II or Korea, what have you. But I can remember various wars that we've been in fact, even recently, but we've never been at war on our soil. And that was what happened on 9/11. It wasn't just the the World Trade Center, it was Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. We were attacked. We can never forget. We've heard that statement about other colossal events in history, the Holocaust for one, and other pogroms and things like that back in the early stages of our world. But 9/11 ranks with all of them because we can, and frankly, some people have either chosen or will forget if it's not reminded of them. We also must remember, I see that a lot, we must remember the memories. Each person. I personally didn't lose a family member. I didn't lose a direct friend. I almost lost a few through various stories of fortune. For whatever reason, they weren't there that day or came late to work, things like that. But in the end, we all lost. The one thing that I think in hindsight, and I remember the day after, and I remember the one thing that I could take away as a positive from this was the feeling of unity, the feeling that we were all attacked, people of every size, shape, religion, origin. That building, the World Trade Center, those two buildings and all of the buildings around it, literally serviced the world. If you've ever been there, it was like visiting other countries. People of every sort were there, and it brought people together. It's an unfortunate thing that something like that would bring people together. Today, I hope we never have to have something like that to bring us together again, but I think we have to bring ourselves together in commemoration and memory. And if anyone knows, last year we did a 9/11 tribute in light. It was something that came from an idea. I said we should never forget when I heard the fact that the New York Commission was thinking about canceling the lights and canceling the tribute. And yes, COVID was at issue and so forth. But in the end, what did Canyon Lake do? We built our own. We built our own memory, our own commemoration, and frankly started a tradition that will never stop as long as we continue to never forget and always remember and always respect. What are we respecting? We're respecting our freedom. That day, it was part of the reason to do this damage was to not only destroy a building and kill lots of people, it was to cause terror in our world, to keep us from flying, to keep us from going to malls and to buildings and things like that. And for a short time it did. Me being a baseball person, it forestalled the baseball season until we could come back. And when we did come back, we came back strong and stronger. And that's what we have to continue to do 20 years later. But also 20 years later, we have to remember those lost. The firefighters, the police, the first responders, and frankly, the average common person, even the lawyers who were in those buildings and who will never be, their memory should never be forgotten and we really, I'm getting a little, emotional, but it's just something that it pains me to think that there are people somehow, somewhere that think, oh, it's just another day. It's actually officially 9/11, Patriot Day. And that's the very reason, and that should never change. Because in the end, we are all Americans, we are all patriots, or we should be, or else our democracy means nothing. Anyway, I don't want to get too deep here other than to say I thank Alyssa Esgar and the committee this year. I thank all those who've supported us last year and this year as well. And frankly, this year, we're going to do more of a vigil and more of a commemoration. Light the lake blue, but do it from individual home to home, family to family, and visit each other, whether it's in person or driving by, and just remember that this event is to commemorate. It's not a party. It's not a celebration. It's also not a funeral. It's a commemoration. The most important thing is we can never let history repeat itself. And the only way to do that is to stand vigilant in our democracy and, frankly, our unity, keeping our people together and fighting for a common cause, which again is our freedom, patriotism, and the United States. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Hi, I'm Eric Kazikoff, the General Manager of the Canyon Lake POA. 20 years ago, I got a phone call at 6:30 in the morning from some relatives, and I spent that entire day, like most of us, I was sitting on the couch watching the television and the events unfold with my 2-year-old daughter on my lap. And a day I'll never forget, and I spent the rest of the week pretty much doing the same thing. And it was a day that changed all of our lives and changed this country. And I'm really proud of the committee who put the commemoration together last year and the committee who's doing it again this year to commemorate this event that changed all of our lives and to remember all the many souls that were lost that day. And the POA is very proud to support this commemoration. We enjoy working with the committee, and I think this is an event that is here to stay in Canyon Lake, and it's a day that we should commemorate every year. And I want to thank the committee for doing this. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Vasquez. I am born in Brooklyn, New York, raised from Puerto Rican parents. I was raised in Woodside, Queens, 64th, 65th Street. I am very proud New Yorker, and I'm here to share a little bit about my experience with 9/11. I was working at New York, a couple of jobs. At the time, I was Akinele Adams' assistant in the music world, and I used to take our clients to sign contracts at the famous restaurant Windows of the World at the Twin Towers. And the day before, I actually had to give a tour to my now husband of all the boroughs, because I was working with his cousin Lance, and his wife went into labor in Jamaica, so he had to leave last minute. We had about 7 shows that weekend that we had to do. And last minute, since he had to leave, I had to train someone to help me out the following weekend. So he flew out his cousin, my husband now, Dwayne, to New York City. And the night before, from 7 p.m. till about 5 o'clock in the morning, I had to show him all the nightclubs, from Queens to the Bronx to Brooklyn, Staten Island, Long Island, all 5 boroughs. So needless to say, we were kind of tired. And I had an appointment at 8 a.m. or 8:30 that morning with, I'll never forget, we called him Sticks. There was a gentleman who wanted to contract Akinele, so we were gonna sign a contract at Windows of the World that morning. So being, kind of tired, showing my now husband around all those nightclubs and stuff, I had to also drive him to the airport. I lived about 3 blocks from Kennedy Airport, and so we were done about 4 or 5 a.m. I drove him to the airport for him to get on a plane, and then I had to change, shower, hustle, and start heading to Manhattan. Needless to say, there's always traffic in New York City, so I got caught in traffic, and I did get there kind of late. By the time I got there and was ready to hit the elevators to go up, I guess that's when the first plane hit. And as you know, in New York City, we don't have earthquakes like out here in California. So that was kind of like, we looked at each other in the lobby like, what was that? Like, we don't have earthquakes out here, what's that? So, and then moments later, that's when we heard evacuate. And once we all ran outside, that's when we found out what had happened. So had I not shown my now husband, which I did not know he was going to be my husband at the time, had I not showed him the ropes for the club business and stuff like that, what we had to do the night before, had I not been so exhausted, I would have made it on time and I wouldn't be here doing this interview. So yeah, so 9/11 is very special to me, very emotional. After that happened, I guess the doctor said that I got something called survivor's guilt. So I kind of felt guilty because I survived and so many people perished in the buildings. It was very hard. And I believe actually my husband's cousin was one of the people that also passed away in Twin Towers. At the time, we had no idea she was even in there. She was traveling from, I guess, England or Canada, and she passed away in there. And so yeah, it was really hard. I actually ended up staying 3 days on ground zero, helping firemen and police officers search for bodies and helping the firemen take off their boots because they were so emotional and so adamant about finding the bodies and rescuing as many people as we could that they were working for hours and hours and they did not want to take breaks. So we had to kind of time them and tell them, okay, that's it, take a break. We would help the police officers or the firemen take off their boots, put on fresh socks, give them t-shirts, make sure they were hydrated, drinking water and stuff. So because I also had a little bit of in the medical field, I was a medical assistant at the time. So, you know, you make that oath. And I had to stay. I had to stay to do whatever I could because I had to thank God that I survived that, you know. So stayed there 3 days and we were helping and it was kind of hard. I did see, we did find one, I can't even say body. It was actually kind of a torso, but anyway, but it was hard. When that happened, I was actually, remember I had dropped off my husband at the airport and for days I'm calling to let him know what had happened and to see if he made it to Canada okay. And I wasn't getting any response for about 3 days. Then it hit me. We had no idea at the time, those first 3 days, what planes were hijacked, what planes were the ones that hit the Twin Towers and stuff. So I started thinking, oh my goodness, I lost him. Like I put him on a plane. Maybe he was on one of those planes. He died or something because I didn't hear back from him. So in my heart, I kind of felt like, oh my goodness, he was on also in one of those planes. And then lo and behold, about 3-4 days later, he finally replied to my calls and my messages and me crying and screaming and stuff. And he said, hey, you know, what's going on? I just heard your messages. What's up? And I said, oh my goodness. I dropped to my knees when I heard his voice because I was so happy to know that he was alive. But I was like, you know, how come you didn't answer me? You had me nervous. I thought you died. And he said, no, you know, I don't listen to the news and I don't listen to the radio. He goes, actually, I was so tired from that day of us driving around and working and stuff. When you dropped me off at the airport, I fell asleep. They tried to wake me up and I missed my flight. So, and he's a very heavy sleeper. And so he actually had ran across the street to Avis and rented a car and actually drove 10 hours to Canada. So he puts his music on, his CDs, and shuts out the world. He doesn't answer phones or nothing. So this is why he had no idea what was happening at 9/11. Fast forward, he found out what happened. A week later, he came back to New York. Being a Canadian, he came to New York. He said, no, New York is under attack. I got to get you out of here. And you're coming with me to Canada. And I was like, what? I'm not going to Canada. I'm from New York. And but yeah, lo and behold, he came and he would not take no for an answer. And he got a U-Haul truck and packed up all my things from my house and we moved to Canada. So ever since, we have been making the pilgrimage almost every year to Ground Zero to pay our respects, to listen to the names being read out because, you know, that's my city. And it hurt me a lot how we got hit and it's affected a lot of people. The craziest thing that all my life, I can ask anyone, what were you doing when 9/11? When people hear, you know, I was a 9/11 survivor, everybody says, oh yeah, I was doing this, I was here, I was there, I was 4 years old, I was in school, I was at work, or I was in the shop. You know, everybody remembers. It was such a big impact on the world that everybody remembers where they were at or what they were doing during 9/11. Even if they were a child, they remember their parents crying, watching the news. So it was big. I'm glad that my city is so strong and we pull together whenever we have crisis. That's why I love my city of New York. New York, New York, so nice, they named it twice. and I'm always going to be. I'm in California now, beautiful California. I work security now for over 10 years. I've been in Canyon Lake for 3 years now. A lot of people will tell you, hey, what's your name? New York. Everybody knows me in New York, the security guard at Canyon Lake. And decided to come out here to kind of get away and stuff. But I always go back home. New York is always going to be home. And yeah, I got into security because of what happened. I feel like I survived. I have to give thanks. I give thanks to God every day that He let me survive that. And I know He has something greater for me. So I feel like I need to pay it forward and help protect a city, a country, my nation, whoever, even if it's just as a security guard. So I'm always on alert at my job, and this is why I did security. Just, I feel like I want to protect something, someone, anything. I'm a mom now. Thanks to surviving 9/11, I was able to have my son Nigel Isaiah. I have one son. He is now, he will be 18 in November, and he is the love of my life. And thanks to my husband that I met the day before 9/11, thanks to him making me late, we were able to have this gorgeous son, Nigel, and he's our story. And I actually was interviewed by Cindy Shu from Channel 2, CBS News, and there's a nice, I think it was 2011, she did a nice interview. I'm gonna find the archives. And it's called Lessons of Love. And I don't know, it's I thank God, again, that I got there late and I survived this. And my sincere condolences to those who lost loved ones. But, again, I'm still here. And thank you for all of you who paid tribute to 9/11 and what happened. And hopefully we can move forward and the pain gets a little less. And hey, that's it. Thank you so much for letting me share this with you.
Hi, my name is Bill Van Vliet. I've been a resident here of Canyon Lake full-time since April of this year. But in 2000, I was asked to go participate in President Bush's National Missile Defense Program. And so I was living in California, but commuted to Washington, D.C. on a weekly basis to run the National Missile Defense Program. And on the fateful day of September 11th, I actually happened to be back here in California. I was called back for a meeting at the Boeing company on September 10th and asked to participate in those meetings. And I was here for those meetings on the 10th. And then on the 11th, I was getting up, packing my bags to go back to Washington, D.C., and had a phone call from our dear friend called my wife, who knew I was commuting every week, and said, "Where's Bill?" And Carolyn said, "He's right here. Why?" And she said, "Turn on the television," which we did. And at that time, we saw the World Trade Center on fire. And shortly after, we saw the second plane hit, at which time I knew we were under attack. And so I said, I have to go. I have to go. And I thought I was going to fly back to my apartment in Washington, D.C., and went into work at Boeing instead. During the day of the meeting, I got the sad news that one of my employees, D.C. Lee, was on the plane that went into the Pentagon. And so 9/11 has actually always been a life-changing day for me. As a result of that day, we as a family made the decision largely to go back and move from California to Virginia to be there. It meant a lot to me because I had been I had weekly meetings in the Pentagon, and they were on Tuesdays, and so I would have been in the Pentagon for a meeting that day had I not been called back. So by the grace of God, I was here, and again, have never forgotten and kind of rose to the occasion to honor this day, and in particular the lives of those heroes who lost their lives that day. So when you're working in the defense and security industry, there's something called challenge coins, and these are coins that are generally presented to you by generals or other people in other companies, executives in other companies. And so here's a few of the coins that, as part of my service in there, there's certainly one from the Department of Defense and the Defense Protection Agency, one from being in the Pentagon, Here's another one from the Joint Chiefs of Staff who we supported. General Peter Pace was on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And then this is a coin from the Missile Defense Agency.
Hello, Canyon Lake, the most patriotic city in the world. 20 years ago, our country suffered a devastating assault on our freedoms, our way of life, and our country's existence. For those of us old enough to remember, the attack united a country who at the time was experiencing a political divide. After the attack, we were united in support of each other and in defense of our country and the freedoms it provides. Unfortunately, we suffer from short-term memory loss, combined with apathy, naivete, and out-of-control political agendas. Today, we find ourselves in a political divide much greater than at any time in our history, forgetting all that makes us much more similar than we are different. As we remember the selfless acts of bravery of those who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001, we need to also remember the sacrifices and the lives lost by thousands of men and women who have fought and continue to fight against evil and for the protection of our freedoms here in the greatest country in the world. Our military and first responders will never forget that service above self is what makes this country great. May we never forget 9/11. On behalf of the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, God bless America, God bless Canyon Lake, and God bless all of you.
All right, good evening. My name is Jack Ohm. I'm a retired battalion chief from the New York City Fire Department, where I worked for 32 years. I'm now a board member of the Stephen Siller Tunnel to Towers Foundation, and I'm here to tell my story of 9/11. Almost 20 years ago now, I was an off-duty battalion chief that morning. I got in after the second tower came down, so about 11:30, 12 o'clock that afternoon. We just confronted with two piles, 8, 9 stories high when I got to the scene of the World Trade Center attacks. When a 110-story office building collapsed, it creates a pile 8, 9 stories high. So we had two piles, 8, 9 stories high, spread over 16 acres of land that beautiful morning that September 11th was before the attacks. And we simply just climbed on top of this pile and started digging, and looking for survivors at first, looking for anybody that was trapped in the collapse of the World Trade Center. And that's how we spent many, many months of work that, was very hard, both mentally and physically, because, at first we weren't finding a lot of bodies because, like I said, we had to start at the top and work down. So a lot of the people, unfortunately, that were killed that morning were buried underneath tons and tons and stories and floors of the collapsed World Trade Center. So it wasn't until I would say December, January, that we started finding people, unfortunately, just bodies at that time, finding bodies and nobody there really to rescue. Most of the rescues were taking place that afternoon. People were trapped in voids and we got them out real quick. Other firemen, not myself, but we rescued them real quick. And then the rest of the people, unfortunately, it was just a recovery operation after the first month or so of working at the site. But along with the very bad memories that I did have, I had some good memories, and those are the ones I focus on. As the Siller Foundation changed something that was so tragic and so bad, so horrendous that happened to us that day, the Siller Foundation, the Siller family created this foundation to remember those 2,977 Americans that were killed that morning and to honor their memories so that we would never forget what happened to us that day. So out of bad comes good, as we know, and one of the best things that came out of the attacks was this foundation to honor our veterans, to honor our servicemen, our military, and honor our first responders. But getting back to the work on 9/11 and the months and the days and months after, it was grueling work. It was rewarding work when you could recover a body, because then you could give that family some closure and let them bury their loved ones. So that was a good part. One of my best memories of being at the scene of 9/11 was when we did find the body or body part, all the work at the scene would stop, it would come to a stop. You had thousands of people working, along with firemen, you had police officers, you had construction workers working there. So all the work would stop at the scene, and we would wrap that body or body part up with the American flag on a stretcher, and then the cops and firemen would line up on that ramp as we took this body or body part out of the World Trade Center area up to an awaiting ambulance, and we'd stand at attention and salute this body or body part as it was carried to the awaiting ambulance. And for me, and I think for most people, that was a sign of respect and dignity and a little closure for that family, that they got something back from their loved one that they lost that day. So that was a very good memory. Another good memory of mine was all the people that came to help us in those 9 months. I always tell the story. It was the first night of the attack, September 11th, probably the morning of September 12th now. I was up on a pile for about 12, 13 hours, and we're getting frustrated. We're getting tired. We are not finding anybody to save. And I looked down at the bottom of the pile, and marching in formation up to my location on the pile was a group of firemen. And I said to myself, these are not New York City firemen, because we don't do anything in formation. But these guys marched up to me, gave me a big salute, and said, "Chief, we're here to help. How can we help you?" And the feeling of happiness and it just overcame me. I felt so overwhelmed with feeling that these guys came to help us in our time of need. So I asked them, I said, "Where you from and how'd you get here?" And they said they're from a small town in Tennessee. When they saw the second tower came down, they jumped into their cars and they drove about 12 hours up to New York City to help their brothers in our time of need. And I always tell people that's the goodness of America. That's the goodness we saw in New York City for those 9 months when everybody came to New York to help us, like I said, in our time of need. So there were good stories that came out of a terrible day. And, coming up to 20 years, I still to this day escort one of my widows. I was, like I said, I was an off-duty battalion chief. My battalion at Battalion 3-2 lost 20 of their men that morning. 3 out of 8 units never came back home. And, it's bittersweet. We take care of those families. I escort one of the widows down to the site every year, as I will this year on our 20th anniversary. Her husband was one of our lieutenants. He died leading Ladder Company 101 in the rescue and efforts that morning. Unfortunately, we never found any part of him. So this is where he's buried, and this is where she wants to be on 9/11. So as long as I'm alive and for as long as she would want me to, I will take her to the World Trade Center on 9/11 so she can visit her husband's final resting place. And unfortunately, for over 40% of those people that were killed that morning at the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center is their final resting place. So the memorial and the museum, I think New York City got it right. It's a beautiful tribute to those people that were murdered that morning. And it is the final resting place for so many people that were there and were killed that morning. So to be there, it's a beautiful, solemn place, and it's just where I want to be to help that family have a little bit of closure and to visit their loved one's final resting place. So for me, 20 years out, every year is a hard anniversary. Every year it brings back all those people you worked with, all those years in the fire department, all those memories, all those relationships that you had and one of my best buddies from high school, who wasn't a fireman, who was just there for a meeting, a morning meeting at the World Trade Center. He worked in Midtown Manhattan, and he was there for a meeting. He got there early, as he always did, and he got there early enough to die that morning. And my wife called me later on that day, and she asked me how things are going. And I said, things are terrible down here. She said, well, I have some bad news. Your buddy Tommy Sullick never came home. And he was at the World Trade Center that morning. And, it was just another load onto my shoulders to grieve and to process losing all these firemen, all the people I worked with, and a lot of friends that weren't firemen that we lost that day. So it's tough, but the firehouse and the firemen are your second family. So we get through things together. We always have, and we always will. Like I said, it's my second family. I'm out. I'm retired 9 years now. I can't believe that. But being involved and getting involved and helping others, as Frank Siller, our chairman and CEO, always says, when you're feeling down about yourself, go out and help somebody, and you won't believe how good you feel after you do that. And so being part of the Tunnel to Towers Foundation is part of me now. I've been part of it for almost since the start of it, and I couldn't ask for a better cause or a better mission to help our military and help our first responders. So out of bad, as we know, comes good, and to be a small part of the Tunnel to Towers Foundation, I couldn't be happier.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Escardi-Kasparis. I'm the chairperson for this year's 9/11 Tribute in Light Canyon Lake event. Many of you know me through the neighborhood because I come from New York. And many of you know my story that I was not in Manhattan on 9/11/2001 because I had a car accident on September 10th, 2001. And nobody would ever say, thank goodness I had a car accident. But that next morning, my now ex-husband called me and woke me up. And he started screaming and yelling at me, where's Michelle? Where does Michelle work? Where's Michelle? And coming from New York, you kind of stupid sometimes. And I said, she works in the World Trade Center. And he said, where? I said, the one on West Street. He said, which building? I said, the one on West Street. Why are you asking me ridiculous questions? We all know where the World Trade, which building? I said, I don't know. She gets off the bus a stop before me. So she works in one of the buildings. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She works in a tall building. He said, put on the news. And I put on the news, and I saw a plane in the World Trade Center. And I dropped to my knees because I didn't know which building Michelle worked in, because we just went through the buildings as though they were just there. I then saw a plane again, and I said to him, where are the air traffic controllers? And why do they keep showing the same thing? And he said, this is a terrorist attack, Alyssa. That's the second building. That's the second plane. And I couldn't find anybody. The telephones were so blocked. We couldn't reach anybody. I went to the school. My children were 4 and 8 at the time. I went to school to pick them up. I brought them home. I went to the supermarket like a zombie, and I walked through the aisles trying to figure out what happens if they blow up the bridges, what happens if we can't get food, what are we going to do? And I just remember walking up and down the aisle of the supermarket thinking, shelf stable, shelf stable. Should I get powdered milk? Should I get regular milk? Should I get orange juice? What can I freeze? What can't I freeze? What's going to happen next? I asked my husband to come home. He said he couldn't because he didn't know what was going to happen and if there was going to be another attack. And he stayed in Brooklyn while I was in Staten Island. This year is our 20th, is 20 years later. I can't say anniversary because we started an anniversary a year after. It's 20 years later, and we've asked the community for the second year to come together in unity and to hold a memorial tribute for those that we lost, for those who survived, and for those who are still finding out today that they are sick from the events of 9/11. I have a friend who told me just a couple of months ago that she's got breast cancer, and they were able to trace it back to 20 years ago because she worked downtown Manhattan and she went to work every day. We as a community in Canyon Lake, we're incredible. We're an incredible group of people who come together and support each other. And this year, for our tribute, we're asking everybody to light up their homes in blue, to come out at 9:11 p.m. on 9/11 and take a moment of silence just to commemorate those people that sacrificed everything that they possibly could in any way that they could. And just to end this, I spoke with Michelle yesterday. And we spoke a long time about this year and about what happened on that day. And I know what happened that day for her because when I finally got in touch with her, she told me she was on her way in to Manhattan. We were both there in 1993 with the underground attacks. She was on the bus on the Brooklyn side of the Battery Tunnel and she saw the plane. And she told the bus driver, stop the bus, and he said he couldn't. And she told him stop the bus, and the whole bus, she got involved. She said stop the bus, and he said he couldn't. But her husband's a bus driver, and she knew the rules. And she said to him, driver, I'm sick, pull over, you have to. And he pulled over, and everyone on that bus got off the bus in Brooklyn and ran. And she ran with ashes falling from Manhattan to Brooklyn, papers and ash falling until she got to her father's childhood home and took cover in her aunt's house. She saved a whole busload of people. We can never forget, and in Canyon Lake, we will never forget. And thank you for your support. I thank our committee for the support. I thank the POA for our support, our directors and our mayor and our city council. And stay safe.
Now therefore be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of Canyon Lake, California proclaims September 11th a day of remembrance in the City of Canyon Lake and calls upon residents to honor lives of those lost. Regardless of world events, Canyon Lakers will never forget the events of that fateful day.
Why are Americans so united? They would not resemble one another even if you painted them all one color. They speak all the languages of the world and form an astonishing mixture of civilizations and religious beliefs. On 9/11, the American tragedy turned 300 million people into a hand put on the heart. Nobody rushed to accuse the White House, the Army, or the Secret Service that they're only a bunch of losers. Nobody rushed to empty their bank accounts. Nobody rushed onto the streets nearby to gape about. Instead, the Americans volunteered to donate blood and to give a helping hand. After the first moments of panic, they raised their flag over the smoking ruins, putting on t-shirts, caps, and ties in the colors of the national flag. They placed flags on buildings and cars as if in every place and on every car a government official or the president were passing. On every occasion, they started singing "God Bless America." I watched the live broadcast and rerun after rerun for hours, listening to the story of a guy who went down 100 floors with a woman in a wheelchair without knowing who she was. Or the California hockey player who gave his life fighting with the terrorists and prevented the plane from hitting a target that could have killed other hundreds or thousands of people. How on earth were they able to respond united as one human being? Imperceptibly, with every word and musical note, the memory of some turned into a modern myth of tragic heroes. And with every phone call, millions and millions were put into collection at rewarding not a man or a family, but a spirit which no money can buy. What on earth unites Americans in such a way? Is it their land, their history, their economic power? Is it money? I tried for hours to find an answer, humming songs and murmuring phrases. And with the risk of sounding commonplace, I thought things over, and I reached but only one conclusion. Only freedom can work such miracles.